Oh, hello everybody. Welcome to my lecture on Byron. Um, Byron is absolutely kind of a magnificent romantic poet. I mean, he's a bit of a kind of a Marmite poet, and I think he's just this wonderful personality, who he's larger than life, and I think that's going to be quite interesting when we compare the individuality that we saw that was so remarkable in Charlotte Smith and William Wordsworth takes on a new angle with Byron, because it's no longer just an individuality; it becomes a performed celebrity persona, and that is half incredibly honest and shocking and funny, and half, as I say, to some extent performed. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to have some slides which I will upload for you alongside these videos. So I'll kind of keep it fairly kind of clear and tell you each time when we're moving on. And I'm going to break these videos up into a couple of short videos so that you can kind of focus in on the different elements. However, it will be best to, first time through, watch them all as they are numbered, to kind of follow the train a bit. But it just means when you want to go back, if you just wanted to look at a specific poem, that would be great. That will be easily to jump into. So this video, I'm just going to set up who Byron is. He's so if you just go onto our first main slide there, you will see a picture of him there fantastically in his Turkish dress. He got this wonderful military uniform, and I mean, it gives you an air of the flamboyance there. This magnificent orange turban and the beautiful little moustache. We need to go through a few of his names. You will see him named variously in various different places. He was born George Gordon, or George Byron Gordon. His mother was Scottish, of the Gordon estate, and he inherited the title of the Byron estate in England, in Rochdale, when he was 10 years old. So his dates here are 1788 to 1824, which puts him quite a lot later, I think, than anyone you will have been looking at so far. He's the first of the young romantics. And there is often a perceived division between the first generation romantics, which is Wordsworth and Coleridge, all those who kind of lived before the French Revolution, and those who were born or certainly growing up after it, which is Byron and Shelley and Keats. And how useful that division is, I think it's useful looking at it in terms of they've got a slightly different cultural background, because they know about the failure of the French Revolution. So we see with Wordsworth and Coleridge is kind of positivity and an aspiration towards, and then this retraction. The younger romantics have seen that. They've seen through the other side of it, but they kind of have an impatience with the older generation. And they're also particularly called the young romantics because of those three that I've just mentioned, they all died very young. They all died around about 30. So Byron is so you see here I've put in celebrity poet there, kind of excuse me, getting model level already, but I put in second generation there in quotations to kind of just indicate that there is a perceived division there, but just be careful when using it. And I think it's a thing you can certainly question in your essay and say, well, does this work? Does this actually show anything different? Is there a unity in these later poets that we don't see in the early poets? I don't think there is much unity. I think we have three really interesting poets who are all aware of each other's work. Byron and Shelley were quite good friends, tricky friends, which I'll talk about a bit. Shelley and Keats certainly knew each other, and Byron didn't think too much of Keats, but they weren't personal friends. But they're all kind of aware of each other in the same circles. Byron is a celebrity poet. Like, his fame was huge. He's often considered the first modern celebrity, because the works that he wrote were vastly consumed, absolutely adored. And he was somebody who, by his adult life, was very wealthy, was very flashy, and I think that's quite surprising, because he well, for him it was quite surprising, because he grew up, yes, kind of in aristocracy, but in very poor aristocracy. So, as a child, growing up in Scotland, in Aberdeenshire, he didn't have a lot of money at all. There's also some lovely reminiscences of various people around the town, particularly his schoolmaster, who recorded him with this wonderful, really strong Scottish accent, which he got rid of when he inherited the Byron. Well, he seems to have gotten rid of, because nobody ever mentions it again, and nobody ever particularly thinks of him as being Scottish. Perhaps it's going to be my Scottish bias. I'm going to look at one of his Scottish poems right at the beginning. Because it's one of the rare points where we see him kind of talking about nature in the way that we're accustomed to thinking of the Romantic poets as talking about nature. He's politically active, but he's very pessimistic. I'll talk about the pessimism as a sort of worldview of, no, everything's doomed. There's no point. So he doesn't have the radical idealism that we'll see in someone like Percy Bysshe Shelley, who dreams of a better future, talks of a better future, and says, no, look, change is possible, we can do this. How much he believes that, we'll get onto that in a week's time. Well, whenever it is we get onto Shelley. But Byron is very, he doesn't really see a positive future. But perhaps conversely, or to that, he's incredibly directly active. So he died. He died fighting for Greek independence, is the valiant way to say that. He was bitten by a bug and got malaria while he was fighting for Greek independence. So he didn't quite die in battle, as I think he would have liked to. But he did, he put huge amounts of money and literally sent himself to go and fight for a cause that he believed in and wasn't directly affected by. This wasn't his home soil or anything. He just said, hey, those guys need a revolution, right? I'll do that. Anything else we need to know about Byron before we get into Loch Nagar? Okay, yeah, we need to talk about sex, because there's a lot of it in Byron, and there's a lot of it in Byron's life. His sexuality is something that people have always been interested in from his early celebrity. He was almost certainly bisexual, and quite actively so. There are kind of little there's a great deal of scholarship, and there are hints about who his various male lovers and who that might have been, and what his relationship was with them. He certainly had a number of very significant and famous female lovers. One of the great Byron anecdotes, and there are so many ridiculous and marvelous Byron anecdotes. I expect you all to, by the end of your research, have come up with your favorite Byron anecdote. One of the great Byron anecdotes is that his friends, he was writing an autobiography, and after his death, his friends read it and went, oh no, we've got to burn this. No one can see this. Which is amazing, because he was such a scandalous and celebrated person that, the scandal was part of the persona. And so what it was that was so shocking, probably homosexuality. Also, he had a long and tragic and beautiful relationship with his half-sister, Augusta Lee, who he may or may not have had a child with. She had a child, and everybody thinks it's his. That kind of led to a big scandal, which seems to be the reason that he left England, that he was going to be prosecuted for indecency, because one can't just sleep with one's half-sister and be homosexual in the early 19th century. So I think that slightly sets up a little bit of his background. I'll pause this video now, and we'll come back into looking at, on the next slide we have Loch Nagar, which is Also La Reine Higuère.